All right, we'll get started. Hi, I'm Belinda Bennett. I'm a data scientist at Airbnb working on people analytics, and I'm excited to talk to y'all today. How's everybody doing? Woo! We've got data night out tonight. It's going to be a great day. So today I'm going to share with you how Tableau has enabled our team to address some of the unique challenges with people analytics, and then also give a few examples of our work. But first, you can find me if you have follow-up questions at belinda.bennett@airbnb.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter if you'd like to add a little content to your feed on travel, data, social justice, puppies, rap music. Belinda A. Bennett. Great. So to start off, I'll tell you all a little bit more about Airbnb. I know some people are familiar. I've heard that a few of the hands-on sessions are using Airbnb data in the example, so that's really cool. But if you're not familiar with Airbnb, I'll go ahead and introduce what our company does. So it was founded in 2008 by these three, Joe, Nate, and Brian. It's an online marketplace to connect people that have extra space in their home, hosts, with travelers, guests. And it was founded in 2008 during a design conference in San Francisco. And so they put together this website quickly to accommodate the overflow from the conference. They put 3 airbeds in their apartment. We've come a long way since this website. This is a picture of a listing today. So this is Tom's Bohemian Getaway in Sayulita, Mexico. So this is, I actually got to visit Tom's Bohemian Getaway last December. I went with my husband. Tom's a surfer, and he's lived in Sayulita about 5 years, and so he was able to give us some awesome tips on local secluded beaches, as well as where to find the best tacos in town. So when we went to these taco shops, they all knew Tom, and so it really gave us the chance to get to know some of the people that lived in Sayulita, thanks to Tom's hospitality. Now, not everybody has space in their home to host travelers, and so last November we launched experiences, which give the opportunity to host for locals to share not just their homes, but experiences in their towns. So this is an experience I went on last November. It's the host, her name is Roslyn, and she didn't have a home to share, but she's passionate about Detroit, and she's passionate about fashion. She owns her own fashion line. It's called Detroit is the New Black. You can kind of see the logo in the background of the photo there. But she loves being able to share about the entrepreneurship and the spirit of Detroit. And with the launch of Trips, she was able to become an Airbnb experience host. So now you can book an amazing 3-day immersion experience with Roslyn in Detroit. You get to have dinner with her. She takes you to the Detroit Institute of Art to look for inspiration. And then you also get to visit her studio and screen print your own shirt using the Detroit is the New Black logo. So we launched the experiences because we believed it would be transformational like traveling. And it contributes to this greater mission of creating a world where anyone can belong anywhere. Now, how big is that world? You might be interested in knowing. So we've had over 200 million all-time guest arrivals, over 4 million homes, in over 191 countries. So that's a lot of data. And the company has continued to grow as the demand for Airbnb is also growing and our product is growing. And so since 2008, we've gone from our first 3 employees, the founders, to over 4,000 employees. And so as you can imagine, that's a lot of data, a lot of decisions need to be made around that data. And so we've had to figure out as a data science team, how do we scale access to the data to these over 4,000 Airbnb employees. So how do those employees interact with Tableau and interact with data? I'll share a little bit now about my own journey with Tableau and my career, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how we've scaled data. So my own journey with Tableau began in 2012. I was working for a company in Austin called UShip, and I was on the data team there. I was not only able to build dashboards with the team, but I also got to work on the implementation and server administration, which was an incredible opportunity. And so then when I moved to San Francisco and started working for Airbnb in 2014, I joined the risk team. We're advancing a little faster than I wanted, so bear with me. Okay. So again, I was part of the Tableau implementation. That's when Airbnb started implementing Tableau. And at the time, I worked on our risk data science team. In addition to working on automated fraud detection, which is what the majority of the team, the risk data science team, did, we also supported our incredible global risk operations team. And that was the most rewarding work to me because I realized that my favorite part of working with data is being able to enable my coworkers to do their jobs more efficiently and effectively. We actually have some of the risk team here, so holler. And so realizing that that was my favorite part of the job, I then was able to transition into a role on our customer service data science team. At Airbnb, the data science team is centralized, and so it makes it possible to look into roles on other teams and have internal mobility. So that career mobility made it possible for me to not only transfer to customer service, but when a job came up on the people analytics team, I realized that that was the right fit. I was going to be working with employee data. So now I'm going to tell you guys a little bit more about the Airbnb people analytics team. I'm going to talk about how we've been scaling people data at Airbnb, and then I'm going to give an example from one of our dashboards, Tableau in action. And then there'll be a Q&A at the end. So the Airbnb people analytics team supports our employee experience department. This department consists of our recruiting team, our HR business partners, compensation, operations, our learning and development team, as well as talent design. So they work on employee engagement surveys. And then we have a really unique team at Airbnb called Ground Control. And this team manages internal employee events, as well as just how we're scaling the culture at Airbnb. And then we also support our workplace team, which is our facilities team, safety and security, food. And then I always think this is interesting to share. We actually have in-house architects at Airbnb on our environments team. So I don't know if y'all have ever seen pictures of the Airbnb office. It's pretty stunning. They will model the different meeting rooms after listings. And then across all of those, we have a diversity and belonging lens. And so our team, our people analytics team, works to help the employee experience organization make data-informed decisions. And we do that by building out a strong infrastructure and making sure they're working with quality data, as well as helping to define success metrics. And then having all those pieces in place makes it possible for us to do this top part of the pyramid, the like cool, futuristic, predictive stuff. And so the team was founded 2 years ago. Sorry, y'all, I'm not trying to pause the slides. Okay. It was founded 2 years ago by my manager, Susan Bianconi, 2.5 years ago. And she was solo for her first year, and then I joined her about 1.5 years ago. Peter Coles is our data science lead. He also leads our public policy team. So he brings a really unique perspective. And then in the past 2 months, we had our first qualitative researcher join the team, Kathy Lee. Sorry. And then Tanya and Anna have joined in the past month and a half as data scientists for the team. And in the next year, we hope to open up roles for an IO psychologist and another data scientist. So keep your eyes peeled for airbnb.com/careers. Go look, see if there's anything available. Great. So now I'm going to get into the meat of the presentation, how we've been scaling people data at Airbnb. I'm going to talk about our people data challenges first. So if anyone in here work on people analytics, HR data, all right, hello. So these will probably ring very true for you. So the first challenge is a lot of the systems are not designed for integration. So I came from our product data science teams where the product's all built cohesively for the most part. It's using the same databases. Things are designed to be integrated, to talk to each other. This is not always the case with people data. You're using outside tools. You have an HRIS system that's not designed to talk to your applicant tracking system. The second challenge that will probably resonate with y'all as well is that people data is highly sensitive. It's employee data. You're dealing with performance reviews, compensation. Most companies don't make that public to the entire population of the employees. And so not only is the system not designed for integration, but it's challenging because you might have to have it live on a completely separate system from the product. And then finally, the biggest challenge that I've seen, or most challenging, is that the data is not transactional. It's often manually entered. So have the rest of y'all experienced issues with that? Manual data entry? Yeah. So unlike the Airbnb website where you either visit or you don't, in people data, someone's manager is manually assigned. There's not usually triggers that say that that person has the correct manager or not. Versus on a website where if you have your logging in place, then everything works. I'm gonna try unplugging this thing to see if it prevents it from moving forward automatically. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me. So first I'm going to talk about that first issue. The system's not designed for integration. So this is how we've addressed that at Airbnb and how Tableau enables us to address that. So we have our ATS, which is our applicant tracking system. At Airbnb, we use Greenhouse. And we have our HRIS, which is the HR information system. At Airbnb, we use Workday. So our applicant tracking system has a Redshift database. And we are able to, in a nightly job, pull all of the data in from that Redshift database and through an S3 bucket, and then load it into a Postgres database. And then our Workday data, the HRIS system, actually has API endpoints for the reports that they produce. And so we hit those endpoints once a night and again load the data in to our database. And so we do a lot of our denormalization and reporting tables in the Postgres database and then push those out to the Tableau server for our partners to access and manipulate. We have a wonderful open source product that was developed at Airbnb called Airflow. And so Airflow is a platform to programmatically author, schedule, and monitor data pipelines. So there's this great user interface. I had to blur out the tables here. So what you're looking at is each rectangle is a table. And so it's really easy to see the parent and child tables. And the colors around the rectangle indicate whether the job was completed successfully or not. And so it's easy to debug your pipelines. So the second issue I talked about was the sensitivity of people data. So we've been able to really leverage Tableau to address this issue. We stood up a separate Tableau server instance so that we can control the users that even on the administration level have access to the data. And then one of the great things for me was to discover user filters. So instead of having to make a separate data source for the engineering business partner and the data science HR business partner, I can make one data source and pull in the user filters, and those users would only be able to access the data that they had access to in Workday. And this also enables a little bit more data democratization because now those HR business partners can connect to the data source. They don't have to just have like aggregated data, they can actually access the underlying data for their data source. So finally, the third issue I talked about was data quality, the manually entered data that you deal with people data, and as well as accountability. And again, Tableau has been a great tool for us to address this issue. So we built a data quality tool, which I'll show y'all a piece of in a second, and it surfaces anomalies by recruiter. So on our recruiting team, in our applicant tracking system, there are some automated triggers, but for the most part, it's up to the recruiter to accurately move a candidate through the recruiting pipeline. So if someone accidentally skips the on-site stage, pushes someone to offer, and then pushes them back to on-site, trying to track that in the pipeline becomes a little bit of a nightmare. You have to figure out what was accurate, what was not. And fortunately, our recruiting leadership was very dedicated to having data and accurate data. And so we were able to partner with them to build a tool that surfaces anomalies by recruiters so that the recruiters can be held accountable for their own data. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, it's not the most exciting visualization, but it's a pretty exciting access for the team. This piece of the dashboard is showing candidates that are in the offer stage, but there was no offer created. And so we were able to, using the applicant tracking system database, identify when a candidate has had an offer created, but the recruiter maybe forgot to move them to the offer stage, or they somehow missed that stage. And the recruiters are able to go in and see this for themselves. So if they look on their weekly hiring dashboard and they say, oh, I'm supposed to have 7 offers this week, why are there only 5 showing up? It gives them quick access to see why that's happening. Another solid thing we did that I wasn't really able to capture with a screenshot is that anytime we're showing candidate information on any of our dashboards, we use the Tableau URL action so that the recruiter can click through to the applicant tracking system and quickly correct any data issues. So that's been huge for us, and the team has been fantastic to work with on that as well. So in addition to addressing the 3 people data challenges that I just talked about, we also needed to scale our small team. Up until 2 months ago, there was just 2 of us, to support an organization of over 600 people. So fortunately, Airbnb had already begun working on a program to train employees on using our data tools. So actually, the product manager is here at the conference, Jeff. Woo! And so I'm going to share a little bit about that program. It's called Data University. So the Data University vision is to empower every employee at Airbnb to make data-informed decisions by providing data education that scales by role and team. And there's a wonderful Medium article that Jeff co-authored with one of the data scientists working on this program with him. So definitely check that out. So what does this look like at Airbnb? Here's a little preview of the curriculum. So the first level is just basic data awareness. So data-informed decision-making, introduction to stats, and then also introduction to our data resources, where to find them, making sure people have access to them. And then the second level is actually using those resources. So teaching about our core data at Airbnb, teaching SQL, teaching Tableau, as well as some of the other tools. And then the 300 level is more data at scale. So this is teaching employees about Hive, about Airflow, which I introduced earlier, as well as more advanced data techniques like machine learning. And so we've been able to leverage that program as well to teach our recruiting and talent teams more about how to use Tableau and how to access these data sources that were now available to them. Just to recap, so how have we been scaling people data at Airbnb? We've been able to integrate our systems using ETL managed by Airflow. We've implemented access controls using Tableau user filters, which has been fantastic. We've been able to audit manually entered data with personalized dashboards. And thanks to the Data University program, further democratizing the data that is available to the team. Great. So now, further on the recap. So that takes care of the infrastructure. We've got the data in our Postgres database pushing out to Tableau. We've got the dashboards addressing data quality. So that made it possible for us to help define metrics with our stakeholders, use those with the teams to measure success. And so now we're starting to get into the exciting, cool futuristic stuff, the A/B testing and prediction. So now I'm going to share with y'all an example of how we're starting to do that by using R in Tableau. So the problem that we were trying to address, we had over 6,600 technical phone screen interviews in 2016. So what's a technical phone screen interview? This is when you're in the recruiting process at Airbnb and you're applying to be an engineer. You'll hop on a call with a current engineer at Airbnb to talk through a coding problem for about 45 minutes. And then there's usually 15 minutes of follow-up. So this is an hour of an engineer's time every time one of these phone screens happens. There was over 340 interviewers that participated in these last year. And so we realized we needed a way to scale this, and we needed a way to understand the quality of these interviews and the effectiveness of the interviews. And so previously, the interviews were assessed by manual review. So they would, hand select a few of the interviews and go back in and check the call, listen to the full recording, et cetera. So one of the ideas we had, among some other experiments that we did, was to measure the average hiring recommendation by interviewer, so we could at least identify if there were interviewers that just tended to say yes to everybody or said no to everybody. We could at least surface that information. And then also correlating the interviewer hiring recommendation with the final hiring recommendation. So who had the most influence, who was kind of predictive of the actual end hiring decision based on their assessment through the technical phone screen. So I'm going to introduce some of the variables that I'm going to use. First, I is the number of interviews done by the interviewer, and then H is the hiring recommendation by the interviewer. So the hiring recommendation is a 1 if they recommend hiring the candidate or passing them, and then is a -1 if they recommend no hire. And so the mean hiring recommendation by interviewer is going to be the sum of the H divided by the number of interviews. So I'll go into some examples because it's the afternoon and we just ate lunch. Okay, so mean hiring recommendation by interviewer. If you have 4 interviews, you say yes to all of them, your average hiring recommendation is going to be a 1 because it was a 1 on all of them divided by 4. If you say no to all of them, -1. If you say yes to half of them, what is it? 0, yay, good job, guys. And then if you say yes to 3, it's 0.5. So this is the visualization that we produced to make it easy for the interview project manager to kind of identify the outliers. And she's also able to, it's not on here, but you can highlight a single individual. So each dot is an interviewer. The x-axis is the total number of interviews done by that interviewer. And then the y-axis is the average hiring recommendation. And then the gray band is the standard deviation, so it's easy to see where the person falls in the visualization. And then we've also colored the dots by whether they fall in or out of that standard deviation, and you'll see why in a minute. We carry that color through to a different visualization. So you can see there's that purple dot way out in front of all the rest of them. She has done over 100 technical phone screens, and they fall pretty much in the middle, recommending hire about half the time. And then you can see there are certainly some outliers on both the yes side and the no side. And so in addition to this visualization, we also have like a line item where each row is an interviewer, and an interviewer can go in and see where they kind of fall in this distribution. So in addition to that metric, we also look at the hiring recommendation agreement. So the variables here are H, again, hiring recommendation by the interviewer, and then U is whether the candidate was hired or not. And so similar to hiring recommendation, if the candidate was hired, it's a 1. If they were not hired, it's a -1. And then we, in R, were able to use the Spearman correlation method to determine the agreement between those two. And so here's a snapshot of what that looks like in Tableau. We're still working on getting this on server. I can anticipate that question coming. We don't have it there yet, but we are able to run it locally with the interview program manager. And so you can see the calculated field up at the top, and then the graph that you're looking at. Again, the x-axis is total interviews, and then the y-axis is the correlation with hiring decision. And then the color of the dot is carried over from the previous visualization. So you can see that our reds, the people that said no, seem to carry a little bit more weight. They ultimately end up agreeing with the hiring decision, which when we started to look into the data was not very surprising because a lot of these were hiring managers. And so if they said no, typically that carried through to the ultimate hiring decision. But this did allow us to identify any outliers at the bottom, people that were just really off base with their recommendation and needed to come back in for interview and calibration. Awesome. So what kind of additional predictive work are we doing? So this prediction on interview effectiveness kind of started and stopped with our applicant tracking system data. Next, we want to move forward to connect that to our performance review data. So how predictive is the actual interview process of whether someone will be a successful employee at Airbnb. We're a fairly new company, and a lot of our workforce was hired in the past couple years, so we're just now getting to the point where we have enough data to look at these kind of questions and have the structured data that we need to be able to do that. We are also working on doing an attrition model. We're using a survival analysis for that, so trying to predict or identify which features are most predictive of someone leaving. And then once we understand what those are, hopefully building some programs around retention for our employees. We're also experimenting on our recruiting process to attract a more diverse candidate pool. We've got some really interesting stuff in the works there, and hopefully we'll be able to talk more about that in a Medium blog post in the future. So again, keep your eyes out, airbnb.com/careers. So if you want to come work with us, it's very exciting, interesting work. So to recap, today we did a quick overview of what people analytics looks like at Airbnb. We talked also about scaling people analytics at Airbnb and how we've been able to do that using Tableau. And then finally, I showed a quick demo of how we've been able to leverage R in Tableau. So now we can do a Q&A. I think there's a microphone over there. So if y'all have some questions, hop in line, ask questions. All right, we've got a question, great. Thank you. Oh. Who else had the Mac?
Okay, I think it works now. All right, so for your technical interviewers are kind of on the outliers section. Do you have a method to bring them more towards the mean?
Yes, yeah. So typically we have an interviewer program manager, and so she's working with the team on trainings for interviewing and also looking at these outliers and determining whether they need to come back in for a calibration session where maybe they shadow other interviewers and understand a little bit better what kind of signals they should be looking for. This is definitely, there's become way fewer drastic outliers now that she's taken over managing the program. And we've added a little bit more structure around what kind of signals we're looking for. Great question.
Hey, thank you for presenting, really insightful. I have a question about the data university. Is that company-wide across all data set, or is there specific per BU training as well?
I think, so great question. I think what you're asking is data university available for all employees at Airbnb?
Yes, and is that also across all data sets available for the company?
Yes. So yes, it's available to all employees at Airbnb. We have global teacher training, so there's actually some teachers in Portland, as well as our other offices. And your second question was if it's across all the data sets at Airbnb?
Yeah.
So it is available for all of the product data sets. It's not available, like the people data is not available to all employees necessarily, but we have been able to tailor some of the content for our employee experience team.
Just more of a follow-up real quick.
Yeah.
If someone joins, let's say, marketing, right, and they have, their own specific data sets, and suppose, if someone joins sales, they need to get familiar with the sales data. So how would Data University educate them on utilizing qualified data?
Yeah, so we actually have, at Airbnb, we have this database called Core Data, and these are like the verified data sets that have been worked on by our data engineering team, kind of vetted in that way. So instead of trying to remove data sets, we actually are just flagging the ones that are certified. So if you come across like Belinda.marketing data, that's not as reliable as core data would be. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Awesome.
Since no one, can I ask one more?
Yeah.
Similar related to the Medium post that you mentioned.
Yes.
I came across the knowledge repo project
Yes.
that Airbnb was working on. Can you comment on that, and how does that relate to Data University, if at all?
Yeah, so knowledge repo has been around since I started, which was 3.5 years ago. So it's been around a little bit longer than Data University, but they're definitely related. They're both programs that were developed to help scale data knowledge at Airbnb. The data repo, for those of y'all that aren't familiar, is a repository where the data science team and other business analysts and our research team are able to publish our analyses so that it makes it possible for us to share our work. And I mean, part of the idea behind it was to prevent duplication. So when you publish your analysis, you include the code that you use, the SQL. A lot of times they're published using Python and R. And so that's been one way that we've tried to scale data knowledge. Actually, the majority of the curriculum for Data University has been published as knowledge repo posts. And so students are able to go back and look at the knowledge repo posts to review that curriculum. They're just a little different in the way that they're, like, I guess knowledge repo is a little bit more passive versus the Data University is a more active data education initiative. Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
How is your data science team structured to support different departments?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier we're centralized. So there's a little over 100 data scientists at Airbnb, and we all report into the same team. But we have specific teams that we're embedded in. So like I'm embedded in the employee experience team. Previously I was embedded on the risk team. There's a different allocation of data scientists for the different product teams. And so each product team does have a dedicated set of data scientists that work on that data so that you still have domain knowledge and expertise.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I think it's one of the unique things about the data science team at Airbnb. Most teams that get to that size, they have to decentralize. And I have clearly taken advantage of the internal mobility opportunities that it affords. And I think it also gives us a great chance to understand how the other parts of the business are interconnected.
With this example you provided and looking at the interviewers and trying to get closer to the mean, how did you roll out that kind of the testing? Did you focus on particular business units, or was this a complete rollout? Like, how is the A/B structure, the testing involved? And then secondly, how did you kind of present these findings to the recruiting team for them to adopt the approach?
Yeah, so this was not an A/B test. We have done some other A/B tests. And typically the work that we're doing on process improvement for our recruiting team is with the engineering organization because we're hiring so many people to that team, so the volume is sufficient to actually see anything. And what was the second part of your question? Oh, how do we roll it out to the recruiting team? So I had a very close partnership with the interviewing program manager for the recruiting team, and so between the two of us, mostly she handled the communication with the team and that retraining program that was going to be in place. And for the most part, the team had been asking for it. They wanted insights. into how they were performing as interviewers and how they compared to the other interviewers. The interviewers were engineers, and so they wanted data.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Hello. So I have a question on how comfortable are your executive leaders in accepting your models and trusting them? Like, if you come up with your interview model and show it to your recruiting manager, are they willing to take an action based on your model?
Definitely. I think that's such an important part of any role working with data, is to have the confidence and support of the people and the leaders on the team that have the ability to enact change based on your findings. And so we have a fantastic head of our employee experience team. The head of our recruiting team is very data-driven as well. So between the two of them, we've had a lot of support for the work that we're doing. If anything, it's more like trying to prioritize all the questions they have. There's a large demand for it, which has been great.
Okay, and
Yeah.
do you feel the same for some of your more advanced predictive models, where let's say if you're trying to predict some sort of accretion or anything, which they can be proactive rather than reactive in handling that?
Yes. So I think with any complex model, you have to really think about how you're communicating it. And I think that's something my manager, Susan, I've definitely learned a lot from her in how to really bring people through the process so they understand how you got to the recommendation. She used to be a teacher, an 8th grade science teacher, and so I feel like she's really good at explaining how you get there. I think just being empathetic to the people you're working with. They don't have all the context that you have a lot of times, making sure that they have that before you push them into a recommendation. You're welcome. Thanks for the question. That's a classic analyst, data scientist question.
Going back to the data repo you were talking about, do you have a way to make that more, what analysis has been done, more obvious to the people doing the analysis to prevent duplicity? I ask this question because we're moving forward on this effort on our end, and we're using kind of a content management system, and we're planning on having each data source be connected to the different analysis that we do.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you do something like that, or notifications, more than just a passive repo.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea to have some sort of alert while you're writing it in some way. Or, but I think for the most part, we just have a culture within our team to, go out and research what's available first before you really dive into something. We also have a very active Slack channel where when people are starting to work on a new piece of data or a new analysis, they'll hop in and say, hey, has anybody ever looked at this before? And typically the response is a knowledge repo post. Someone will put a link in, it's like, oh, you can learn more about it here. So that's worked pretty well for us. I think you call it a good point that you have to really rely on that culture of research for that to work. So there are some interesting opportunities. I don't know, Jeff, do you know, are there any alerts or anything in knowledge repo? I don't think we have anything like that yet, but that's a cool idea.
Just one other thing, what do you use for your knowledge repo?
It's through Git, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so it's open source as well, so you can find it if you Google it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Going back to the education and the curriculum program, how do you get to start on the curriculum that you are creating for your employees? Is it this data education available to all of your employees, and how successful has it been at Airbnb?
It is available to all employees. There's weekly classes. I think it has been quite successful. We've seen a large uptick in our number of weekly active users on our data tools. I know personally of a couple people that have been able to advance their career using the skills that they learned in Data University. Does that address your question?
Yes, so how do you get to start to create this,
curriculum.
The curriculum?
Yeah, I was not part of the curriculum creation. It was a data scientist at Airbnb. She's been at Airbnb, I think, almost 6 years now. And so she had done a previous version of this a couple years back called School, S-Q-O-O-L. Very clever. And that was very SQL focused. But then over the years following that, we realized we've got all these new data tools. We have Airflow, we have the knowledge repo, we have these new things that people need to learn how to use. And so I think she, having been at Airbnb for so long, really understood what the different employees in the company needed to learn.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have a question about how you're connecting to your data at Airbnb. So you showed us the Postgres database. So
Right.
Are you connecting directly or using some sort of connectors? And also just who has access? How do you, and maybe even across other areas at Airbnb about accessing data through Tableau?
Right, it is actually very different. So our team, we have the Postgres database, but the rest of the company is on a completely separate stack. They use Hive. But the way that our team connects is using so we will connect directly using the Postgres connector and then publish extracts. And so on those extracts, that's where we put the user filters, et cetera. So there's only 2 of us on the team that are able to actually directly access the Postgres database. And then the rest of our stakeholders access the data through the data extracts.
Okay. Can you speak to other teams as well about how they access the data? Does everyone just have access already, or?
Yeah, we have different layers of access within the company for product data based on your job function and what you need to have access to. And then, again, those teams, for the most part, are accessing extracts that have been published. But those extracts are referencing the Hive database, or they're using Presto on top of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Airbnb seems to have been very proactive in terms of putting data out there for the public, putting processes and explaining things on the blog about how things are done with the data scientists. Is that something that was like kind of brought about by leadership saying we want to be this kind of organization, or did that grow out of the data science team had something internal and wanted to roll that out? Like, how was that culture developed?
That's a great question. Gosh, I can't speak to kind of the decision at the leadership level to do that. I know it is a big part of the culture of the team. There's a lot of people on our team that came out of PhD programs, and so they're very used to sharing their research, and they've seen the benefits of being open with the work that they're doing. So I imagine that has become a big part of our culture. Jeff, do you have any insights on that question? So how did we decide to become so open with the work that we're doing and the tools that we have? Yeah, there has at the leadership level been a decision to invest heavily in open source. So that I can speak to that. But as far as like all the blog posts and everything, I think it's partially organic and partially, yes, the leadership does support that work, which is important.
It's been really interesting to watch it all roll out, so thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's been helpful.
Hi, so my question is, in Silicon Valley, where you have your Googles and Facebook, retaining top talent must be a priority for you guys. So what action items that come out of some of the people analytics work that you guys do?
Yeah, so we do a lot of work on our employee engagement surveys. And so looking at what kind of features are most predictive of engagement at the company, as well as I mentioned earlier, an attrition model that we've been working on. And so then making recommendations to our employee experience leadership team around programs they can design to address those highly predictive features. I don't know that I can really go into exactly what those are.
I was just wondering if designing cool buildings or cool offices is part of it.
Yeah, we haven't exactly figured out how to measure that impact, but I like it. I love going to the office every day and
Cool.
There's
Thank you.
Brad, thanks for the question.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious how structured or standardized your interviews are. So, like, how are interviewers scoring people throughout the interview?
Right.
And have you looked at the data to see if there's a misalignment between those scores and then hiring decisions?
Yes.
And sort of to follow up on that, I think it could be cool to like sort of speed up the feedback process, and if they're scoring people real time, feeding that back to them and saying, hey, like based off of the scores you've given, you know, there's potential that you should, you know, say yes or no to a hiring decision.
Oh, that's a cool idea. So to address your first question, yes, we have, especially in the past couple years, as we're trying to limit bias in our interviewing process, introduced a lot more structure. It's also been great for us because now we actually have more data to work with. I mentioned earlier we weren't really able to do the analysis of connecting interview effectiveness to employee effectiveness because we didn't really know what is an effective interview and how do you measure that. And we needed the structure in place to be able to do that, in addition to reducing bias. So is the idea that you would give the person that's interviewing, the candidate, feedback in real time, or you'd be giving the interviewer?
The interviewer. So basically, like, I mean, you're talking about your training interviewers after the fact, like saying, you know, you should have focused on this in the interview, or maybe like come to a particular hiring decision based off of the way you scored them, like speeding that up and feeding it back to them in real time. If they're scoring, you know, like on a particular interface or something, entering scores and then like saying based off of this score, you know, you should come to a particular decision.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. There's definitely some challenges that introduces, which is like the bias piece. We don't let any of the interview panels see the other person's recommendation until everybody's submitted their feedback. And then we have a structured roundup process as well. There's some cool articles about the work that we've done on the reducing bias in the interview process, and that's around it. But I think part of the structured interview scorecard work that we've done has been saying, like, here's the 20 things you're supposed to get a signal on from this take-home test. And if someone gets 11 of them, they should pass, or something like that. And so that is kind of along those lines, but less interactive, which would make it cooler and futuristic. Or cool. Thanks for the question.
Cool. I'm an IO psychologist, by the way, if you want to hire me.
Oh. Airbnb.com/careers. Belinda A. Bennett at Twitter. Or at symbol. You guys get it. Yes.
You mentioned that the data scientists are centralized at Airbnb, and if I heard correctly, they report to the same person?
Yes.
But if you have all of the permissions and data ownership, like for example for people, data or finance, who does oversee everything, or how is it that it can be centralized?
So is your question, if everybody's reporting into one data structure, how do you segment the data so that you can control access?
No, I thought you said that the data scientists report to one person.
Right.
That's correct.
Yes.
And with the all of the permissions and ownership in the data, how can they really report to one person?
You do have to have like a well-structured permissioning system. To be honest, because I work on a very separate segment of the data, I can't speak to exactly how we manage that. But we do manage the permissions separately from the organizational hierarchy. Yeah, they're not necessarily interconnected for us. Okay. Thanks for the question.
Does your process allow for any unstructured text feedback?
For interviewing?
Yes.
Definitely. We haven't gotten to the point where we're doing much with it yet, but ideally that would be down the line for us as well.
Yeah, one of the things I'm kind of curious myself is if there's going to be any correlation between the interview rating and mining through the feedback itself. you'd hope, but.
Right, ideally. Yeah, I know right now it would be some sort of NLP and like manual tagging. And we haven't gotten to the point where we would prioritize that work yet.
Thanks.
Yeah, good question. There's so many like products out trying to solve that issue right now. Great, thank you all for coming. It was great to present to you guys today. Thanks.